All right, so on my Superman review, I called it Marvel is found dead in a ditch because Marvel hasn't done something in a while that I found seriously awesome. But Fantastic Four First Steps might just be that. Now, don't get it wrong, I liked Thunderbolts enough. I thought it was a step in the right direction. But Fantastic Four First Steps is seriously solid, and I'm really excited to say that. I thought Marvel might be on its deathbed, but the MCU is back, guys. Fantastic Four First Steps is really solid. I just got back from an early screening of it. I was nervous, all right? The trailers didn't look that good to me. Genuinely, I thought it looked like more CGI sludge. I found the performances a bit questionable in the trailer, but I'm really happy to report that Pedro Pascal as Reed Richards is easily the best on-screen iteration we've had. He seriously feels like a real person. That was my favorite thing about this movie is Reed, Sue, Johnny, and even Ben Grimm. They all feel like real people with real emotions. Now, yes, Johnny Storm is still a bit of an MCU quip machine, but not so much, not as intensely as usual in these Marvel movies, all right? It makes sense when he's making jokes to an extent, and because Reed is so solemn and serious throughout this movie, I actually think the contrast works a little better. They're not just all speaking like Marvel characters. They don't all talk like the same person like usual in some of the weaker Marvel movies. There are clear character distinctions, and I like that. I really liked Pedro's performance as Reed Richards. Some people might think it's a bit too low-key, but for me, I thought the grounded sense of humanity and humility and this vibe of like kind of defeat he has throughout the movie, given this moral quandary, this moral dilemma that is set up around the pregnancy and the child they will be soon having together, is really interesting to me. Now, you've probably seen from the trailers, the movie takes place in a Jetson style sort of world. It's a mix of retro kind of style and fashion and also future technology. It's a cool little alternate universe. This takes place on a different planet Earth. It's part of the multiverse saga, so it is a different world. It's the first time Marvel has done this in the MCU, and it's an interesting idea. The movie is essentially a fun space adventure meets a family film. It feels kind of like a live-action Incredibles in the best way possible. Now, the film is rated PG here in Australia, which isn't the same as America's PG. It's essentially the same rating that the Incredibles and Ratatouille has, so I was a bit nervous going into this, that this wouldn't be that dark and gritty and kind of feel like a kid's film, but it actually somehow still scrapes by without having too much visceral violence. It's just a heavy concept, and I don't want to give away what the actual dilemma and moral issue of this movie is, the big thing they're having to face, because I actually think it's worth going in blind. Obviously, Galactus and Silver Surfer are the villains here, but the actual dilemma here, I think if you don't know what it is worth having as a surprise. But again, it's dark and heavy, and as a result, Sue, Reed, Ben, and Johnny are all quite dour throughout this movie, and it's an aspect of it I really appreciate it. I thought the world building of this movie was pretty good. It does a good job of setting up the kind of future retro tech aspect of this world. There's a really well done smart talk show intro basically telling us who the Fantastic Four are, what they've been up to in this version, this iteration, this world. And if you're on the fence about the movie, that section is actually available on Disney Plus right now. The first 4 or 5 minutes of the movie you can go watch on Disney Plus. So if you're kind of unsure about this movie, go check that out. And if you like that, you'll probably like the rest of the movie. And again, I think Sue being pregnant here raises the stakes and adds a sense of vulnerability to the team. It's really fun watching the whole team be concerned about this, and the way it develops as the movie goes on is really exciting. Now, I will say, if we are comparing, all right, I do think the Silver Surfer was visually more striking in Rise of the Silver Surfer. I do kind of wish this version of the Silver Surfer had the same menacing atmosphere. I think as this movie goes on, particularly with Galactus, it does manage to capture that, oh my god, otherworldly sense of dread. This feeling of humans interacting with something they can't even begin to comprehend. But I feel like the Silver Surfer's introduction here, just the initial intro, is a bit lame. You don't really get that sense of like otherworldliness. You've seen in the trailers that Johnny Storm chases around the Silver Surfer into space essentially, but you don't really feel the gravity and the scale and the horror of that. It's just kind of like a bit of a one-note scene, and it moves by very quickly. And I think that's because the director knows that even though those first 2 Fantastic Four movies weren't great, that Silver Surfer chase scene and intro was exceptionally well done. and I think they just kind of skip over it and don't really bother. It's not a particularly exciting scene, but we do get really exciting Silver Surfer scenes later in the movie, so I can kind of forgive it. On top of that, if I'm being completely honest, and I'm trying not to compare too much because I do think this one deserves to stand on its own, but I was hoping for a bit more of Johnny, the Human Torch, and the Thing. I think overall some of their banter was okay, but I wasn't laughing particularly hard, and I feel like a lot of the kind of jokes at the expense of their characters, a lot of these jokes around, oh, that's typical Johnny or arrogant Johnny, kind of weren't very well earned. It's sort of that thing of like, okay, well, I know what these characters are meant to be from previous iterations, so I guess I can laugh at that. But if I was a completely new audience member that didn't know all this stuff, I would be a bit like, what's the joke here? Is Johnny Storm really that arrogant? And there's big character beats and character turns around the Thing, in particular Johnny Storm, where he steps up to the plate. And it's clearly going for this big moment of like, oh, Johnny Storm has turned a new leaf. He's not just the arrogant, cocky dickhead. But it's like, on my end, in this particular iteration, in this particular version, he's kind of felt relatively mature the whole movie. Yes, he makes some jokes, but I didn't feel like he went on a particularly big character arc. It feels like it's been told to us, not really shown to us, if that makes sense. And again, it feels like it's building off what we already know of these characters, but not in a way that feels somewhat earned and understandable like Superman. It just felt a bit undercooked, in my opinion. I really liked in those original Fantastic Four movies the empathy you had for the Thing. It was a really well done characterization. And when the wife left him, you're like, oh my God, how could you do it? How mean. And in this one, for a certain reason that I don't want to spoil, the Thing starts growing his facial hair out, and it kind of causes some self-consciousness in him. Like, he's worried about how it looks, and it does look a bit off-putting. And I wish we knew more about this version of the Thing. I wish we lent into that more. I wish we kind of leaned into, like those original movies lent into, like how living as this rock man does have him viewed as a different sort of person, right? And like leads to issues in his day-to-day life. And I really, like, there was a little humanity shining through there, and I wish we got more of that, you know? I think the characterization for the Thing and for Johnny was a bit thin in this movie, which is a shame because I think they're both giving really good performances. I feel like in this version of the Fantastic Four, I kind of have the opposite problem I had with those original two ones, where in the original two ones, I thought the Thing and the Human Torch were easily the best parts of that movie, and their dynamic was fantastic, and the rest of the stuff was kind of clunky. And in this one, I think it's Reed and Sue are the strong points, and Human Torch and the Thing, they are pretty good. I just feel like we didn't get much of them, and I hope in the other movies that we get, hopefully of this series of films, they are fleshed out a bit more. But overall, do go see this film. There are genuinely shots that are striking, all right? There is a lot of CGI sludge, and unfortunately, as the movie goes on, it gets more and more CGI sludgy, just that clear green screen look. There's a lot of shots set in Times Square particularly that look kind of awful, but at the same time, when it's anything to do with Galactus, it looks huge and impressive. There's a great sense of scale, and Galactus is genuinely menacing, but the way it's framed feels otherworldly and huge. The only thing I can compare it to of recent memory is the kind of the kaiju stuff in the most recent Superman movie, but there's a great sense of scale and size and pretty good visual effects. There's some shots here that I would gladly use as screensavers. They are quite cool. The movie's pacing is excellent. There's a really good theme song that you would have heard in the trailers, and again, I just like the story here. It's really well done. Now, on the other end, I think Moss playing the Thing does a very, very good job just with limited screen time, but fucking hell, whoever was in charge of syncing the lips, all right, like animating the mouth to line up with the dialogue, needs to get fired. I genuinely think there were more lines that weren't in sync than were. Like, it was relentlessly distracting. I just wish the movie looked better. That's the one thing holding it back for me, as well as just some character beats that I need to get into spoilers to explain. So let's get into spoilers now. If you're interested in this movie, go see it and then come back for the spoiler section. 3, 2, 1. If you enjoyed this video, please consider getting a membership to this channel. Links for Patreon and YouTube membership, they're both the same, are in the description below. Every 2 weeks, I do a podcast, talk about every single show and movie I've watched. This is both new releases, old releases, everything. It's the price of a cup of coffee and you get about 2 hours of extra content from me. All right, so now I can gush about what I like and kind of rag on things I didn't like. So first off, I absolutely loved the getting ready for the baby montage. That was the first thing in this movie I thought was really exceptionally well done. It felt straight out of like The Incredibles or The Jetsons. It was just so cool seeing Reed try and be a parent but be a scientist first, and this whole montage of him sort of figuring out his own version of parenting I think was actually interesting. There's a conflict conflict later on in this movie between Sue and Reed, where Sue is giving Reed shit about how his brain works and how he's always science focused. But I think she may have been missing the mark here a bit. I don't think this is clunky writing. I think it's intentional, but I think it's that sort of thing where some people, their love language, so to speak, is like gift giving, and some people will say it's shallow, but maybe for them it's not. And this kind of reminded me of that. Like, yes, Reed is very science focused, and maybe you could see that as absent fathering, but this was all sort of him tinkering with science stuff in a way that benefited his kid. It's him trying to be a father in the only way that he knows how, and I actually thought it was like well done, subtle storytelling. I appreciated it. Next, I talked about in the spoiler-free section this whole moral dilemma, but yeah, the plot hinges on this idea that Galactus wants their unborn child, all right? It wants their unborn child so then they can take on the role of Galactus and he can return to being immortal, at least from what I understood. I think this idea as a plot is just really, really compelling. I love the scene where Reed and the gang get back home and Reed has to do a press conference and basically say, hey, so like we weren't willing to pay the price, all right? They were going to spare everyone if we gave them our child and we didn't want to do that. So, yep. And it's a good moral conflict. You understand why people are pissed. It sets up really good conflicts in the group. I love the scene where Sue and Reed have this disagreement because in the moment, yes, I get why Sue is offended that he's even had this thought, but the way it was presented, I understood where Reed was coming from. He's basically saying, look, like I understand why they're annoyed. I mean, like if we don't pull this off and the whole world is doomed, our baby dies anyway. Like I get it. And like that was a fair point for him to make. And I do think what Sue said, I get that she was horrified by what she thought he was thinking, but what Sue said was quite harsh, and I appreciated this mature conflict. I was seeing there being like, oh, that's a rough thing to say. She basically says, I know how your brain works, I know all that about you, and I don't like it. I wish it was different. And you're like, oh, it's a good moment. And again, the fact that Reed has been quite dour and disturbed conceptually throughout this movie, and then this is kind of like the final thing that's piling onto him, is a really good moment. And it almost goes full tilt later in the movie when we get the Sue fake out, which we will get to more so. But when that happens, I was like, God, this movie is pretty relentlessly cruel to Reed Richards. Like he's really going through it. It almost reminded me of Spider-Man 2, where that is just Peter just constantly going through it. And I really thought Pedro brought something great to the table. But in saying that, I also think Vanessa Kirby as Sue does a really good job. She is simultaneously really warm and pleasant, but can be quite stern and strong where she needs to be. And I think she was a really well-realized character. Johnny Storm just looked low-key kind of weird in this movie. He simultaneously looked very young and also kind of old. It was a combination of like what looked like a wig or bleach fake hair and the contact lens. Just something did not look right. I don't know what it was, but he looked like an android. I can't really explain it better than that. He looked like David from Prometheus or like the replicants from Blade Runner. Like something was just not quite right with the way he looked, and I found it very, very distracting. Circling back to what I was saying in the spoiler-free section with Johnny Storm, they're obviously going for the whole idea that he's like a bit of a dickhead, a bit of a hothead. He acts on impulse, but I thought he was clearly very useful to the team throughout. And they were going for this big turn, when Johnny Storm steps up to the plate, and crunches the numbers and figures out this solution. They're all kind of like shocked. And I just wish we had more time with Johnny before he did this, so I understood why they were so shocked. Because as it stands, I'm like, yeah, he's kind of been that guy throughout the whole movie. He's been consistently pretty good. Yes, he makes jokes, but he's been crushing it the whole time. So when he went to make his sacrifice, I was kind of like, oh yeah, I wish I really watched him go on this big arc, but instead I was kind of told about it, And I did really like the scene where he was going for the sacrifice. I almost wish the movie ended with him making the sacrifice and maybe he's lost out in space and they have to find him or something in the next movie. Like I was kind of gearing up for something a bit more morbid and interesting, but the Silver Surfer saves it at the last second. That's fine, I suppose. But my ears pricked up when I actually thought he was going to go through that wormhole. I was really excited. And similarly, they genuinely got me for a bit. I got Thunderbolts. In Thunderbolts, there's that moment where that girl gets whoomped, by the void, and then they undo it. And I was a bit disappointed. And in this one, I genuinely thought Sue died for a second. I know everyone in the comments is going to be like, you idiot. Of course she wasn't going to die in the first Fantastic Four movie. But the way they pulled it off, the performance from Pedro, again, this whole arc around him losing everything and constantly being dogpiled on, I actually thought it was happening. I was really excited to see it happening. I was like, wow, this takes guts. I didn't expect this. It was earned. I was moved. I felt really bad for Reed. I felt really bad for the characters watching this family get the child, right? Win and be able to keep the baby, but lose the kind of maternal figure of the group. I was like, quite moved. And yes, it is a really cool display of the baby's powers, right? To have the first display of powers be that the baby is bringing the mum back to life is really cool. Again, reminds me of The Incredibles, but I assume The Incredibles is inspired by Fantastic Four. But yeah, I was just kind of like, oh, I was moved. I really enjoyed Johnny Storm's sacrifice, and then they faked that out. And then I really enjoyed Sue dying, and they faked that out. And that's okay. I guess it is the first film. But, you know, like if I had it my way, I might have kept one of those at least for a while, you know, really had us sit in it, kind of like Infinity War style. But that's okay. I also mentioned in the spoiler free, there is an all-time great Marvel section in this, like genuinely like top 5 sequences. Here we go. It's the one where Sue is giving birth in the spaceship and they're escaping. So Johnny has to go and shoot Silver Surfer out in this wormhole. So you've got a lot going on. You've got Galactus on one end, and then you've got them going through this wormhole and they need to dock, and they dock incorrectly, but it doesn't matter. They need to get out of there. And then Silver Surfer's looping around the wormhole. Johnny's using his powers to shoot, from what I understood, which is really cool. But on top of that, it was just a great sequence. It looked practical. I loved the little like trying to line it up like it was a jet. All of that was great. I was already enjoying it. Then you have Sue giving birth. You have her taking off her like suit. You have her taking off her outfit so she can give birth, and the pants floating around, and just all of this stuff. I was like, this is so conceptually cool. And then she makes the ship invisible, like so great. And I would have gone full tilt and have the baby float around for a second, but just this visual of the wormhole in the background and the team falling apart, and then you have this moment where Silver Surfer kind of like phases into the ship and goes to reach into the stomach and grab the baby, like Inside style, like New French Extremity style. She goes to grab a baby out of this mother's stomach, and then they finally get out of it. It was cool. It was out there and horrific and strange and beautiful. I couldn't believe it was like a Marvel movie. Marvel lately has been kind of producing slop here and there, but this was like fantastic, like a really heady, cool Star Trek-y sci-fi moment. It was reminding me of Interstellar in the best way possible. I thought it was really, really cool, and I just wish it looked visually a bit better and was a bit cleaner CGI-wise, but I just loved that this was a Marvel movie really going for like uncomfortable, exciting ideas. Speaking of like horrific kind of cool ideas, there's a moment where Reed gets stretched out as far as he can, kind of solidifying to us that he just can't stretch infinitely, all right? Like there is a limit, and Galactus tries to find it, and it's pretty horrific, and it goes for a while, and you're like, whoa. I also really like the section where the team had to like put their brains together and do sciencey stuff, and they were like, okay, we're not going to give up our baby. Instead, we are going to set up these teleportation devices all over the world and move the planet. I liked it. Yes, maybe scientifically it's not 100% accurate, but I went with the movie and I thought it was a fun idea. I love how it was visually presented. It wasn't just boring, dumb expo. It was like how we as citizens would be presented this information. I love the little setup with the egg teleportation, and I love the way they had to adjust the plan and instead tried to teleport Galactus instead. It was a cool little trap. Again, I wish the Times Square stuff looked better, but it was the first time we've got Stretchy Man action that looked really good. And I loved Mole Man as well. That was a cool little moment too. The whole kind of, I assume this is a traditional Fantastic Four villain that then Incredibles copied, but it was kind of cool to see a live action Incredibles villain slash initial Fantastic Four villain. Mole Man was really cool and really funny. There's also a recreation of a very famous Fantastic Four comic book cover in the early chunks of the movie that was really exciting too. But yeah, I just really like this movie. I love the visual design of Galactus. I also love that he looked like a real person. It looked like they probably got a real person, a real costume on set and then blew that up. And then everything around him was CGI rather than everything being real and then he's CGI. It was kind of cool. I thought it was visually well done. And overall, I'm just glad to say that there was a fun Marvel movie again that I had a really good time with. I did like the post-credits scene, the first one with the Doctor Doom reveal. That was pretty exciting. However, I will say most of my excitement was the idea that we might see Robert Downey Jr. Like, I can't help but be a bit excited for that, even if the idea of bringing Robert Downey Jr. back for the MCU is quite a strange one. But when I saw that cloak, I'm like, oh, cool, we're going to get a look reveal of Doctor Doom. And we don't get it. It does remind me of those old post-credit scenes where it was like a pre-CGI established like Thanos. You get what I mean? Like they hadn't figured out how Thanos would look yet. So now when you go back and watch those old post-credit scenes, it feels a little strange. It's just very obvious that they had a body double there. They didn't actually get RDJ. Would it have been that hard to pay RDJ a little just to turn around and go shh or something? You know what I mean? Like I'm sure RDJ would probably charge Marvel out the ass, but I think Marvel can still afford it. Like I would have liked that, but I guess it's fine as it stands. It's just kind of like, yeah, I know Doctor Doom's coming. So I wish it was RDJ. You know what I mean? Like I got excited, but I really only got excited for something that we didn't get. So I also mentioned I wish the humor landed better for me. Like a lot of the jokes just didn't land, and thankfully there weren't as many as usual, and they weren't like usual Marvel jokes where they got in the way of the story. Like most of it was making sense character context wise, but I did really like the whole extended bit around them being a dysfunctional family trying to get the booster seat in the Fantastic Four car. That was great. That was really well done humor, and I wish we got more of that, because as it stands, the movie either was trying to be funny and failing, or it just wasn't very funny at all. But that was a really good section, and I appreciated it. So overall, I'm feeling like a 7 out of 10, maybe even an 8 out of 10. I'll have to sit on it a bit. I wish the ADR was better. I wish there were less audio issues. I wish the CGI looked better, but I found the story really compelling here, and I would like a sequel soon, which is more than I can say for a lot of big blockbusters lately. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please consider getting a membership to this channel. Links for Patreon and YouTube membership, they're both the same, are in the description below. Every 2 weeks, I do a podcast, talk about every single show and movie I've watched. This is both new releases, old releases, everything. It's the price of a cup of coffee, and you get about 2 hours of extra content from me. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Please like, comment, subscribe, and have a lovely day.